Hello, I'm Charlie. I'm a writer and a journalist. Um, I got my start in journalism actually in Hong Kong, where I lived for a while. I was an intern at a food magazine, which was about 3 months of just doing all of the work that nobody else wanted to do. I just made copies and answered phone calls from upset subscribers and things like that. Um, and then I worked at a travel magazine, which was all online for a little company that had basically no money, and it was just me and a tech guy and my boss in basically an office the size of an apartment. And then from there, I worked at the South China Morning Post, which is a major newspaper in Hong Kong. Um, at the South China Morning Post, I was their features reporter, which means that I did anything long form, so anything the size of a magazine article, or kind of what would be maybe a front page story of a newspaper. So it's between 2,000 and 3,000 words. I worked under their lifestyle section, which means I did mostly kind of fun reporting. I did stuff about arts and food and travel and trend pieces and fashion. I did a lot of reviews of bars and restaurants. And it was great. I really loved my job. It's kind of split, doing a job like this is kind of split into three distinct sections. The first is you have to think of an idea. And then the second is you do all of the research for that idea. And then the third is you actually write the story. I thought before I got this job that the hardest part would be the third part, which is the writing part. And that's the part I like the least, but actually the hardest part are kind of the first two parts. Thinking of an idea is difficult. A lot of people can think of one or two ideas, but I would have to think of maybe 3 or 4 major story ideas a week for years. And it's really fast before you start running out of ideas or repeating yourself or feeling burnt out. And then once you think of the idea, you have to put in a lot of work walking around, interviewing different people, getting people on the phone who might not want to talk to you, traveling. The slang amongst journalism is, what is it? It's hitting the pavement and wearing out your shoe leather are the two things they say, because you're supposed to keep moving constantly. And most of my job, I would probably spend 4 days a week not at my desk, walking around, going to offices, visiting people at their homes or in restaurants or bars, and then only kind of 1 day a week sitting there and intensely writing. The writing part, like I said, I enjoy the least because it's more tedious. You don't get to talk to people, you don't get to kind of learn new things or have any kind of adventures. And also the stakes are really high because it's going to appear in a newspaper. You have to be careful that you're very accurate. You can't make any mistakes or else people get very upset with you. If you make a big enough mistake, they could actually sue the newspaper, which would be bad, or you could get fired. And what you write has real world consequences. So if I write something negative about, say, a restaurant, then people who read it might not go to that restaurant and it could affect that person's business. So you have to take it very seriously and be careful not to make kind of any mistakes. I have made mistakes. I've spelled people's names wrong, a lot of spelling mistakes. I'm not a good speller. I've gotten details about dates wrong and things like that. And nothing too serious, but it is embarrassing. The person you write about always gets angry, and then you have to go back and tell your boss, and often they print a retraction underneath your story confessing that you made a mistake and apologizing and correcting the error, which is very embarrassing, and you don't want to have that. And that kind of sticks with your stories for the rest of your life, and anybody looks up your name, so you don't want that on too many of your stories. That was the most kind of fun job I've had because I was in Asia, which was fun. It was all kind of light things. I got to travel a lot. I did hotel reviews. I got to write about things that are pleasant, like food and art. From there, I moved to New York, and I worked for New York Magazine, and I ended up doing politics writing, and that was just when Donald Trump was running for president. And that was the least fun job I've ever had. That was not fun because, one, the hours were bad. I was working nights, so I would do the night shift and kind of stop work at about 5 a.m. every morning and start work at maybe 10 p.m. Every night. It was also the least fun because you were talking to boring people. I was talking to lawyers and politicians and calling spokespeople for political campaigns, and they were all kind of boring, and it was also much more strict. I wasn't able to write with my own voice at all. It had to be very dry. It had to be very kind of fact-based, very, carefully researched, and there was kind of no room for humor or fun or write about anything kind of positive. Also, because I was writing about politics, people have very kind of passionate views about politics, and I ended up getting a lot of hate mail and death threats and people threatening me or kind of trying to expose me, a lot of times on Twitter or Facebook or email. And even though you don't know who they are and you're trying to take it very seriously, after the first few, you kind of take it as a point of pride that you are, getting people's attention. But then after getting hundreds of kind of threatening emails, it can be very wearing, and you never feel very secure, and it makes you kind of think less about humanity in general. From New York Magazine, I quit there after the election, and I did freelance work for Vice, for New York Magazine, for the company I worked for in Hong Kong, and for a few other newspapers. And that was more fun because I got to write about whatever I wanted to write about. It's about whatever my idea is, and I could write about things that I was passionate about. I wrote a lot about food also, but then also social justice and human rights and immigration and reform and things like that, which I was passionate about and felt like I was doing good work. The problem there with freelancing is so much of the work is you have to sell each story individually, so you're not getting a salary. And so if you don't work, you don't get paid. And you have to be kind of constantly turning out new content. And a lot of the time you could be spending thinking of ideas or selling stories is spent trying to reach out to editors or get people to know your name or working on branding or getting your name out there. I kind of hated all of that, and I don't like kind of self-promotion or marketing when that was important. And then also, to be honest, another problematic part was that a lot of people in this business can be a little bit shady, and a lot of the work that I would do, they would buy a story and I would work for months on it, and then they would take a long time to even pay me back or haggle after the fact, trying to pay me less than they had promised. Sometimes it took 6, 7, 8, 9 months to get paid back. And when I was living paycheck to paycheck, that was very difficult. And it put me in a position a lot of calling people, pressuring people for money, threatening to get lawyers involved. And a lot of my time was spent kind of begging people who had already done the work for to pay me the money they had promised. And that was difficult. After that, I moved to Los Angeles, and I got a job with my old company in Hong Kong, but based in the United States, doing kind of a similar thing that I was doing before, kind of long-form magazine stories about culture in the US. And that was great. That job was wonderful kind of for 2 reasons. It was the old job that I liked the most, but I was also very far away from my bosses, who were kind of a full 12 hours away from me. So there was very little oversight, and I had a lot of freedom to kind of do what I wanted to do. And it was salaried, so I didn't have to be fighting for my paycheck all the time or yelling at my bosses. Mostly I was just kind of left on my own. And that was a wonderful job. And then just a few months ago, I was transferred to the hard news desk. So before that, I was in lifestyle and culture desk, and then I switched to news. And that's because so much was going on between Hong Kong and the US. With the coronavirus, with China's politics, with the democracy revolution and democracy protests in Hong Kong, that they moved me to that desk to do hard news again, which is not my favorite. And I covered for a few months the coronavirus, a lot of stuff about the coronavirus, a lot of stuff about Trump. That was very difficult because one of the things that's also positive and negative about being a journalist is you have to have expertise in a lot of different areas. So, for example, I was interviewing doctors and scientists about viruses, and I had no idea anything about biology or chemistry. And I was writing stories about infection rates and knowing how to do statistics and things like that, which I had no idea. I'm terrible in math. And so a lot of it was a learning curve about people teaching me or watching YouTube videos or training myself how to kind of be basically literate in sciences and maths and things like that. And then that brings me to kind of one of the worst things about being a journalist, which is that I lost my job a month ago. Because for a lot of reasons, advertising was down in the newspaper, and so they were cutting positions. And that's a problem, is as I was a journalist for kind of print media, magazines and newspapers, that world is shrinking so fast, and there's so little money that, being a journalist for a newspaper or magazine is increasingly difficult. They pay less, they pay less for the same job than they would have paid for even in the 70s. So the pay is getting worse and worse, and there's less and less jobs to go around, and people are reading less papers and magazines. And so in some ways, I feel very lucky that I feel like I was probably one of the last people to have this kind of old school style job where you could really work for kind of print publications and have the kind of old kind of classic style journalist where you're really going out in person and getting to travel and getting the budget to be able to go and do the research appropriate for all of your stories. Which doesn't mean journalism won't exist going forward, it just changes a lot. As you know, I'm sure most journalism is online now. And some of that can be very similar, but some of that can also be kind of different. A lot of journalism now is just rereading what other people have already written or repurposing stories from other people or doing a lot of kind of research and writing that you can do from your desk. So a lot less with that wearing down the shoe leather and hitting the pavement, which is good for fast news and for more people reading and people getting more educated, but is bad in that there's a lot less kind of new, kind of unique points of view, a lot less kind of original stories being written, and a lot less kind of in-depth research. So things tend to be much more shallow and they appear briefly and then disappear, and there's a lot less kind of in-depth, real many pages and hours and months going over to one topic and reporting it, which is very important. So I think the more people that can be interested in journalism and the more people willing to kind of do this kind of work, I think the better it is for democracy, for the world. I think that it's a very valuable role a journalist plays in society because people in power and people with a lot of money are always going to try to get away with things and try to be corrupt and hurt people in different ways. And I think a journalist is in a rare position where they can kind of shine a light on that and bring it to attention and not let people get away with kind of their worst behaviors. Yeah, so that's my job. Thanks very much.